Welcome. I'm Ed Poswoli, president of TrippScott, and today we have another installation of our webcast. We have Avik Roy. Avik is a Manhattan Institute Senior Fellow, acclaimed healthcare expert, and has written extensively about the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. We're going to talk about that in a second. One of the things he has written is how Medicaid has failed the poor. And I believe we'll talk about this next time you're in Florida, but let's get right into the Affordable Care Act.
Sure thing. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you. Avik, in spite of its name, Obamacare, will it truly make health care more affordable?
Well, this is the fundamental flaw of the law, is that it's called the Affordable Care Act, but it actually drives up the cost of underlying health insurance, particularly for people who shop for coverage on their own, but also for people who get it from their employer.
And why so? Let's talk about the individual piece of it, which is now in effect. People are trying to get on the exchange. We'll talk about. We really won't talk about the website issue. That at some point they'll get that fixed, maybe. But why will individual cost increase?
Because the law heavily regulates in a way that hadn't been regulated before those policies. So it used to be that individually purchased insurance policies were regulated at the state level. So there was a broad range of regulatory frameworks depending on the state. New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, states like that had very heavily regulated markets. States like Florida, California, Texas had relatively lightly regulated markets. So Obamacare comes in and puts this one-size-fits-all regulatory regime, not just in terms of the things that people hear about, like pre-existing conditions, but also a laundry list of benefits that all the plans have to have, certain financial considerations in terms of the way the plans are structured. All those things end up driving up the cost of the plans.
You mean to tell me like a single male, 27, has to have a pregnancy piece of his plan now?
That's absolutely right, but and it's not just a pregnancy coverage. It's the fact that, for example, under the law, young people are going to have to pay a lot more for health insurance to partially subsidize or defray the cost for older people.
Why is that?
Well, it's a provision called community rating that's in the law. It doesn't make that much economic sense, but it's in there because they wanted to make it so that older people could more easily afford health insurance, and younger people, they thought, well, let's just make them charge more, they can handle it. And so in Florida, for example, the average individual policy will cost 40% more than it did before in 2013, but it's a much higher number for young people, and it's a particularly higher number for young men, because the law requires that men and women also be charged the same amount. And typically speaking, for younger people, middle-aged and younger women, they have about 21 to 25% higher health costs than men do.
So if you live in Florida and you're a 30-year-old male,
right,
how high are your rates going to go?
I'm trying to remember the exact number. I want to say it's around 64%, something like that. You can find all the information on our interactive map that we at the Manhattan Institute have published. If you just Google Obamacare cost map, you can find all the data.
So, my understanding is that in order for these exchanges to work, though, they need younger people to sign up and buy policies.
And that's why there's an individual mandate. Because it's a bad deal for these young people, and the only way to get them to sign up is to force them to sign up effectively.
Yeah, but how do I, if I'm a 30-year-old male, how do I sign up for something that's now going to cost me 60% more, potentially?
Well, the hope is that the individual mandate is the stick that forces them to do that. A lot of insurance executives I talk to are skeptical. They think a lot of young people won't sign up.
And so what happens then if enough young people don't sign up?
If young people don't sign up, or particularly healthy people, because it's really healthy people in general who are going to be charged more than sick people, and young people tend to be healthy, that's how it works. So if healthy people don't sign up, then the average expenditure per person will be higher, because if only sick people sign up, they spend a lot more, they consume a lot more healthcare services, which means the premium, the underlying premium, will go up even more. It's called the adverse selection death spiral, or the health insurance death spiral. That won't affect poor people so much because the subsidies will kick in to protect them. But if you're middle class or above, if you have average incomes or above, those subsidies won't kick in at all, or perhaps only to a small degree, and you won't be protected from those increases, and you probably will go without coverage.
And you'll just decide to pay the penalty.
Yeah, and the penalty is not that high relative to the cost of health insurance. So even if people pay the penalty, they know now they can get coverage if they ever need it if they get sick. So you bust your knee skiing or something, well, that first year you're going to have to pay for some of that maybe, but after that you can still get covered. So a lot of people may just do that.
Well, then why are some 300,000 Floridians found out their individual policies were canceled last week? Why did that occur?
Because those plans weren't compliant with the new Obamacare regulations that have all these requirements on the structure of the health plan.
Well, the president called them substandard. Were they
Right.
substandard?
Not necessarily. So there's an insurance consultant named Bob Leshevsky who had a blog post recently where he wrote about his Cadillac plan that covered him for everything, had a low deductible, broad choice of doctors, but because it didn't contain some of these technical considerations in terms of the pregnancy coverage, because he's older, or maybe it didn't have exactly the same coverage for people of all health statuses, all ages, it's illegal. And now the plan that he has to buy in the exchange, it has a higher premium, 66% higher. It has a $500 higher deductible, and it has a much narrower network of doctors. So it's one thing to say I'll trade a higher deductible and a narrow network of physicians for lower premium. Some people in a free market might choose to do that.
Right.
But Obamacare, they're paying higher premiums for a less attractive insurance product.
But why is, so let me go back to this. Floridians look down this and say individual policyholders are looking at a 40% increase. Is that the same across other states or no?
It varies widely across the states. So some states like New York are going to see on average decreases because under Mario Cuomo 20 years ago, New York State instituted a number of the Obamacare-like regulations that drive up the cost of health insurance.
So the regulation from Washington is similar to what the marketplace here in New York is used to.
Exactly.
But in Florida, where it's less regulated, and people are still, even under less regulation in Florida, somebody making an economic choice, let's say they did buy health insurance. They bought what they needed. That's no longer going to be available now.
That's right. And those are the plans that are going away that are legal. They're so-called junk plans, but they're not so-called junk. They're not junk plans. And I think that's one of the great misrepresentations of this White House to say that these plans are junk. They may not cover all of the social objectives that the White House and some progressives want, but these were plans that certainly adequately protected the people who bought them from injury or illness. And those plans are going away.
Right. And we represent, my law firm represents small and mid-sized businesses. Now, most of them have 50 or more employees and offer health insurance. What's the impact on their businesses and their health care costs?
So small employers will see higher costs. And that's one of the things that, again, we're not hearing a lot about from the White House. They're saying, well, if you have employer-sponsored coverage, you're completely unaffected by Obamacare. That's not true. The law also imposes these same regulations on employer-sponsored coverage. The difference is that employer-sponsored coverage is already relatively heavily regulated, so the level of disruption or the degree of disruption won't be as drastic as it is in the individual market, but it will still be significant. For example, now Delta Airlines is a large employer.
Right.
Theoretically, they should be the least affected by the law because they have self-insurance through ERISA. They're saying that they're going to spend $100 million more in health care costs for their workers in 2014 relative to 2013. And that's, again, a self-insured large employer. They're spending $100 billion more. So just imagine what it's like for a lot of these small employers where the small group policies are going to be much more heavily regulated than they were before and much more heavily taxed than they were before. There are a lot of fees associated with private insurance now. They're going to drive up the costs.
But I thought that the president and the administration had said only about 5% of the population is going to be impacted by Obamacare. What you're saying now is that might be far greater than that.
That's absolutely completely false, and they know that it's false. And this is one of the things that's, I think, very difficult about this current situation is the president's quasi-apology for what happened with the cancellations is being compounded because they're saying, well, it's only 5% of people who are affected, and it's all junk plans anyway. Neither of those things are true. A lot of the people had good coverage before that is being stripped from them. And also in the employer-based market, there are going to be much higher costs. And people are going to see it. People are going to see about 15 to 20% increases relative to health inflation next year than they did the year before on average.
You know, cost, some of my clients aren't really concerned overly about cost, and so they may be willing to pay a little extra. But what about their choice of doctors? I mean, the flexibility that certain plans that are currently in the marketplace, how does the Affordable Care Act impact those?
In the individual market, the plans have very narrow networks. And this is for a reason, because the design of the physician and provider network was one of the few things that Obamacare left unprescribed, non-dictated. So as a result, while a lot of things about the plan, what benefits it covers and all that, are heavily prescribed in the law, what the network is not. So all the plans are competing with each other on price. What's the best way to compete on price given the structure of the exchanges is you can only compete on network design. So they negotiate to have the lowest cost providers, the lowest cost doctors, the lowest cost hospitals in the network, and exclude everyone else. That way they can have lower premiums. All the market research suggests that people will take that trade. People would rather have a lower premium, even if that means a lower network. But the end effect is, even if you want to hire a larger network, that plan isn't available to you, or if it is, it's at a much higher cost.
Okay, so basically it looks like we're going to pay more and possibly get less.
Yeah.
And it not just impacts individuals, predominantly young versus old, or healthy versus not so healthy.
Yeah.
And regardless if you have a group plan from your business that's provided in your industry versus individual plans, everybody appears to be affected.
Though there is a much greater effect in the individual market than the employer-sponsored market.
Okay.
But there is an effect there too.
Avik, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and thank you again. And that concludes our webcast. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.